Welcome, everyone, to another Sovereign Stack podcast. My name is Braden, and today I'm joined with Dashus.
Hello.
So today we are going over a special book, one that I found on a YouTube channel. The host of the YouTube channel recommended this book. He said it was very interesting, and so I decided to pick it up and read it. And so Dashus and I did that together. It was way more interesting than we could have ever thought it would be. So we're here because we wanted to talk about this book. Not only do we recommend you read it, but we're kind of going to go through the entire book, and we're going to pick out all the different highlights that we found. And so this book is called Fiat Money Inflation in France. It's by Andrew Dickson White. He was a professor at the University of Michigan and also at Cornell. He had a course about the fiat money inflation in France from 1790 to 1796. Okay, and so what happened was he wrote a book and made a speech. He also gave the speech to the Senate in the state of New York. Because there began demands for large issues of paper money in the United States around that time. And so he gave a speech warning of the dangers of fiat money inflation. So we made this book also to warn even more people.
This was published in 1896, I believe. Clearly it did not work because we have so much paper money now.
So the book was originally published in 1896, copyrighted in 1923. The book is out of publication. You can go on Mises.org, and all you have to do is search for fiat money inflation in France, and you'll be able to find the book. You can download a PDF copy, and basically just go to town reading it. I would highly recommend it. It's maybe 3 to 5 hours worth of reading, depending upon your speed. I'm going to read the first page just because I think this does a really good job of introing the entire book. So, the title of the book is Fiat Money Inflation in France, How It Came, What It Brought, and How It Ended. Early in the year 1789, the French nation found itself in deep financial embarrassment. There was a heavy debt and a serious deficit. The vast reforms of that period, though a lasting blessing politically, were a temporary evil financially. There was a general want of confidence in business circles. Capital had shown its proverbial timidity by retiring out of sight as far as possible. Through the land was stagnation. Statesmanlike measures, careful watching, and wise management would doubtless have before long led to a return of confidence, a reappearance of money, and a resumption of business. But these involved patience and self-denial, and thus far in human history, these are the rarest products of political wisdom. Few nations have ever been able to exercise these virtues, and France was not then one of these few. There was a general search for some sort of road to prosperity. Before long, the idea was set afloat that the great want of the country was more of the circulating medium, and this was speedily followed by calls for an issue of paper money. The Minister of Finance at this period was Necker. In financial ability, he was acknowledged as among the great bankers of Europe, but his was something more than financial ability. He had a deep feeling of patriotism and a high sense of personal honor. The difficulties in this way were great, but he steadily endeavored to keep France faithful to those principles in monetary affairs which the general experience of modern times found the only path to national safety. As difficulties arose, the National Assembly drew away from him, and soon came along the members' renewed suggestions of paper money. Orators in public meetings, at the clubs, and in assembly proclaimed it as a panacea, a way of securing resources without paying interest. Journalists caught it up and displayed its beauties. Among these men, Marat, who, in his newspaper, The Friend of the People, also joined the cries against Necker, picturing him, a man of sterling honesty, who gave up wealth and fortune for the sake of France, as a wretch, seeking only to enrich himself from the public purse. And so it goes on to describe the setting. Anyone today reading his prophecies of the evils sure to follow such a currency would certainly ascribe to him a miraculous foresight, were it not so clear that his prophetic power was due simply to a knowledge of natural laws revealed by history. Remembrances of the ruin which had come from the great issues of smaller currency at an earlier day were still vivid, yet the pressure toward a popular currency for universal use grew stronger and stronger. The Financial Committee of the Assembly reported that the people demand a new circulating medium, that the circulation of paper money is the best of operations, that it is the most free because it reposes on the will of the people, that it will bind the interest of the citizens to the public good. Dashes, I think this is quite interesting how in the beginning of this book, there are basically quotes from people, proclaiming it to be, the thing that everybody, we should be doing this. That people are publishing this in newspapers.
It's especially interesting to me that, and you'll notice this several times throughout the book, that there are quotes saying that it will, in this case, it will bind the interests of the citizens to the public good. And there's other claims that paper money would cause people to be more moral for some reason. And it really is an example of something of its time, because I don't think it's very hard for me to understand why they would have thought that it would bind the interest of the citizens to the public good, possibly because the money represented was supposed to represent the wealth of the country itself. And therefore, whereas something like gold or specie would be private individual wealth, this was certainly the popular opinion at the time.
Or at least that people asserted themselves and people did not defend against the bad ideas well enough. That it was hey, look, everybody thinks this is a good idea. We should do it. And you have to exert constrain and control over situations, and to make sure that the bad ideas don't take are not you have to debate them. You have to say, is this actually a good idea? This person is using the might of their newspaper to peddle this idea as good. How do we fight this? How do we make sure that this doesn't happen?
And this is all taking place around the time, or during, rather, the French Revolution. And so this is like the populist movement at the time. And the book doesn't really get into it, but one of the calls that people demanded during the French Revolution was a universal standard of measurement. And we take that for granted now. We have liters and even in America we have like feet and yards. But it wasn't until like the French Revolution that there were agreed upon standards of measurement. And I can see this coming out of that movement of trying to do away with specie and then have these livres. How do you pronounce it?
How French do you want me to pronounce it?
Very French.
Livre.
Livre. Okay.
Yeah. In case you don't understand, this is the same currency that Mark Zuckerberg tried to launch, called Libre. But Not really. But
And it works just as well.
yeah, it's LIVRE. So, but so oh, also just to make sure that everybody knows, the word specie is like metallic currency, so like gold, silver. Just to be clear, not a word I was familiar with before I read this. Here's another interesting tidbit. But the current toward paper money had become irresistible. It was constantly urged, and with a great show of force, that if any nation could safely issue it, France was now that nation. Oratory prevailed over science and experience. In April 1790 came the final decree to issue 400 millions of livres in paper money based upon confiscated property of the church for its security. The deliberations on this first decree and on the bill carrying it into effect were most interesting. Prominent in the debate being Necker, Dupont de Nemours, Murray, Cazales, Pétion, Bailey, and many others hardly inferior. The discussions were certainly very able. No person can read them at length in the Moniteur, which I think is perhaps like an official record of the government at the time. Nor
It was the
even
newspaper, right?
I haven't looked it up, to be honest. Nor even in the summaries of the parliamentary history, without feeling that various modern historians have done wretched injustice to those who were then endeavoring to stand between France and ruin. Okay, so this is where it gets interesting. Well, actually, this is only the very tip of the iceberg of where it gets interesting. Okay, so this sum, 400 millions, so vast in those days, was issued in assignats, which were notes secured by a pledge of productive real estate and bearing interest to the holder at 3%. No irredeemable currency has ever claimed a more scientific and practical guarantee for its goodness and for its proper action on public finances. On one hand, it had what the world recognized as a most practical security, mortgage on productive real estate of vastly greater value than the issue. On the other hand, as the notes bore interest, there seemed cogent reason for their being withdrawn from circulation whenever they became redundant. And so I'm going to skip forward a little bit. The first result of this issue was apparently all that the most sanguine could desire. The Treasury was at once greatly relieved. A portion of the public debt was paid. Creditors were encouraged. Credit revived. Ordinary expenses were met. And a considerable part of this paper money having thus been passed from the government into the hands of the people, trade increased on all difficulties seemed to vanish. The anxieties of Necker, the prophecies of Maury and Cazales seemed proven utterly futile, and indeed it is quite possible that, if the national authorities had stopped with this issue, few of the financial evils which afterwards arose would have been severely felt. The 400 millions of paper money then issued would have simply discharged the function of a similar amount of specie, but soon there came another result. Times grew less easy. By the end of September, within 5 months after the issue of 400 million in assignats, the government had spent them and was again in distress. What do you think they're going to do?
As you were saying that, I'm just having a flashback to Powell saying there's an infinite amount of money in the U.S. Treasury. They can just print more.
No, it's the other guy. I don't know his name. It's not Powell. It's I can't remember his name, but it's not Powell. It's the other guy.
Oh, okay. But yeah, it's kind of shocking to like hear, like to know that they said like, oh yeah, we can just continue printing money.
I think it
And
is a little bit different. The Go ahead. Sorry.
well, no, it is different, and there's a real question of, let's say they stopped doing this, would everything just collapse? But but no, it is just eerie to read this from however long, from over 100 years ago.
Yeah, it's this is going to get even if you're listening to those listening, this is going to get weirder and weirder. And I do recommend like listening to this all, and I do recommend you get the actual book. Print a copy of it, whatever you have to do. Read it because it's eye opening. So there's this guy Maribot, and he was basically against the issuance of the assignats, but now he's for it, and so he suggested that assignats be created to an amount sufficient to cover the national debt, and that all national lands be exposed for sale immediately, predicting that thus prosperity would return to the nation and that all classes would find this additional issue of paper money a blessing. It goes on. This operation was to be the emission of 2,400 millions in legal tender notes and a law that specie should not be accepted in purchasing national lands. Again, that's gold and silver and other things. So this is in Maribot's speech. The newspapers of that period, in reporting his speech, noted it with the very significant remark, "This discourse was loudly applauded." And it goes on. Into this debate was brought a report by Necker. Most earnestly, therefore, he endeavored to dissuade the Assembly from the proposed issue, suggesting that other means could be found for accomplishing the result, and he predicted terrible evils. But the current was running too fast. The only result was that Necker was spurned as a man of the past. He sent in his resignation and left France forever. The paper money demagogues shouted for joy at his departure. Their chorus rang through the journalism of the time. No words could express their contempt for a man who was unable to see the advantages of filling the treasury with the issues of a printing press.
And just sorry, the next line of that is Murat, Herbert, Camel de Molins, and the whole mass of demagogues so soon to follow them to the guillotine were especially jubilant.
So it goes on. On the other hand, appeared in the leading paper, the Monitor. Oh, it is a paper. A very thoughtful article against paper money, which sums up all by saying, "It is then evident that all paper money, which cannot, at the will of the bearer, be converted into specie, cannot discharge the functions of money." I'll read that again. "It is then evident that all paper which cannot, at the will of the bearer, be converted into specie, cannot discharge the functions of money." Sound familiar?
Yeah, all that
That's
money in your wallet, throw it away.
well, if you can't, if you can't redeem the currency for the underlying, it doesn't have function of money. So it goes on. Now, so this is about a man named Talleyrand. But he now adopted a judicial tone, attempted to show the Assembly the very simple truth that the effect of a second issue of assignats may be different from that of the first, that the first was evidently needed, that the second may be as injurious as the first was useful. No laws and no decrees can keep large issues of irredeemable paper at par with specie. So it goes on. The nation at large now began to take part in the debate. Thoughtful men saw that here was the turning point between good and evil, that the nation stood at the parting of the ways. Most of the great commercial cities bestirred themselves and sent up remonstrances against the new emission, 25 being opposed and 7 in favor of it. But eloquent theorists arose to glorify paper, and among these, Royer, who on September 14th, 1790, put forth a pamphlet entitled Reflections of a Patriotic Citizen on the Issue of Assignats, in which he gave many reasons why the assignats could not be depressed, and spoke of the argument against them as vile clamors of people bribed to affect public opinion. He said to the National Assembly, if it is necessary to create 5,000 millions and more of the paper, decrease such a creation gladly. He too predicted, as many others had done, a time when gold was to lose all its value, since all exchanges would be made with this admirable guaranteed paper, and therefore that coin would come out from the places where it was hoarded. He foretold prosperous times to France, in case these great issues of paper were continued, and declared the only means to ensure happiness, glory, and liberty to the French nation. Speeches like this gave courage to a new swarm of theorists. It began to be especially noted that men who had never shown any ability to make or increase fortunes for themselves abounded in brilliant plans for creating and increasing wealth for the country at large. Okay, so it goes on. So this is all about the second issuance, and so on the next page, in spite of all this plausibility and eloquence, a large minority stood firm to their earlier principles, but on the 29th of September 1790, by a vote of 508 to 423, the deed was done. A bill was passed authorizing the issue of 800 millions of new assignats, but solemnly declaring that in no case should the entire amount be put in circulation exceed 1,200 millions. To make assurance doubly sure, it is also provided that as fast as the assignats were paid into the treasury for land, they should be burned, and thus a healthful contraction be constantly maintained. Unlike the first issue, these new notes were to bear no interest. Great were the plaudits of the nation at this relief. Among the multitude of pamphlets expressing this joy, which have come down to us from the friend of the Revolution, is the most interesting. It begins as follows. Citizens, the deed is done. The assignats are the keystone of the arch. It has just been happily put in position. Now I can announce to you that the revolution is finished, and there only remain one or two important questions. All the rest is but a matter of detail, which cannot deprive us any longer of the pleasure of admiring this important work in its entirety. The provinces in the commercial cities, which were at first alarmed at the proposal to issue so much paper money, now send expressions of their thanks. Specie is coming out to be joined with paper money. Foreigners come to us from all parts of Europe to seek their happiness under laws which they admire, and soon France, enriched by her new property and by national industry, which is preparing for fruitfulness, which will demand still another creation of paper money. Will demand still another creation of paper money. Holy crap. Okay, so now we haven't really like gone into the effect too much, but that's definitely in here. Okay, so yeah, this is like kind of like laying out the laws, and you know the different things that happened due to the politicians, etc. Here's another very interesting note. Citizens had been spurred on by law to send their silverware and jewels to the mint. Even the king sent his silver and gold plate, and the churches and convents were required by law to send to the government melting pot all silver and gold vessels not absolutely necessary for public worship. For copper money, the church bells were melted down, but silver and even copper continued to become more and more scarce. In the midst of all of this, various juggleries were tried, and in November 1790, the Assembly decreed a single standard of coinage, the chosen metal being silver, and the ratio between the two precious metals was changed from 15 and 1/2 to 1 to 14 and 1/2 to 1, but all in vain. It was found necessary to issue the dreaded small paper, and a beginning was made by issuing 100 millions in notes of 5 francs, and before long, obedient to the universal clamor, there were issued parchment notes for various small amounts down to a single sou. That's SOU.
Sue.
Sue. Attention was aroused by another menacing fact. Specie disappeared more and more. The explanations of this fact also displayed wonderful ingenuity in finding false reasons and in evading the true one. A very common explanation was indicated in Prudhomme's newspaper, Les Révolutions de Paris, of January 17, 1791, which declared that coin will keep rising until the people shall have hanged a broker. Another popular theory was that the Bourbon family, in some mysterious way, drawing off all solid money to the chief centers of their intrigues in Germany. Still another favorite idea was that British emissaries were in the midst of the people, instilling notions hostile to paper. Great efforts were made to find these emissaries. And in more than one innocent person experienced the popular wrath under the supposition that he was engaged in raising gold and depressing paper. Even Talleyrand, shrewd as he was, insisted that the cause was simply that the imports were too great and the exports too little. As well might he explain that fact. When oil is mingled with water, water sinks to the bottom, by saying that this is because the oil rises to the top. This disappearance of specie was the result of a natural law as simple and as sure in its action as gravitation. The superior currency had been withdrawn because an inferior currency could be used. Some efforts were made to remedy this. In the municipality of Quilleboeuf, a considerable amount in specie having been found in the possession of a citizen, the money was seized and sent to the assembly. The people of that town treated this hoarded gold as the result of unpatriotic wickedness or madness, instead of seeing that it was but the sure result of a law working in every land and time, when certain causes are present. Marat followed out this theory by asserting that death was the proper penalty for persons who thus hid their money. Further on down the page. The plenty of currency had at first stimulated production and created a great activity in manufactures, but soon the markets were glutted and the demand was diminished.
I was just, as you were saying that, it's remarkable because at this point, both you and I have read several old books about inflation happening in in countries like the Weimar Republic and all that, and it's remarkable how similar all of this is. Like every time it happens, it seems to happen in the exact same way, and yet people keep on doing it.
Yeah, well, listen to this entire podcast. I recommend you do that because a lot of these things I didn't know. And again, we're not even getting to the interesting stuff yet. With the masses of the people, the purchase of every article of supply became a speculation in which the professional speculator had an immense advantage over the ordinary buyer. Says the most brilliant of apologists for French revolutionary statesmanship, commerce was dead, betting took its place. Down the page, the French are a naturally thrifty, but with such masses of money and with such uncertainty as to its future value, the ordinary motives for saving and care diminished, and a loose luxury spread throughout this country. A still worse outgrowth was the increase of speculation and gambling. With the plethora of paper currency in 1791 appeared the first evidences of that cancerous disease which always follows large issues of irredeemable currency, a disease more permanently injurious to a nation than war, pestilence, or famine. For, for at the great metropolitan centers grew a luxurious, speculative, stock gambling body, which, like a malignant tumor, absorbed into itself the strength of the nation and sent out its cancerous fibers to the remotest hamlets. At these city centers, abundant wealth seemed to be piled up. In the country at large, there grew a dislike of steady labor and a contempt for moderate gains and simple living. In a pamphlet published in May 1791, we see, in regard to this also, public opinion was blinded. The author calls attention to the increase of gambling in values of all sorts in these words. What shall I say of the stock jobbing, as frightful as it is scandalous, which goes on in Paris under the very eyes of our legislators? A most terrible evil, yet, under the present circumstances, necessary. Eerie.
It's remarkable how similar this is to people doing meme coins and gambling with crypto. And the way that it talks about, like, there was, it becomes, I'm not sure if it's here, but it might be later on in the paper, where it becomes this like actual labor and thriftiness and like saving your money becomes looked down upon because cannier individuals know that this is not going to end and money is just going to become worth less and less. And so the idea of like working for an honest wage that's just going to become less and less valuable is not even incorrectly looked down upon. And this class of, I really find this word very funny, stock jobbers, of people who were the crypto bros of their days, basically.
Yeah.
Just
they were the Murads of their day.
They were the what?
Sorry, Murad is a crypto shitcoin influencer.
Okay.
Yes. So now began to be seen more plainly some of the many ways in which an inflation policy robs the working class. As these knots of plotting schemers at the city centers were becoming bloated with sudden wealth, the producing classes of the country, though having in their possession more and more currency, grew lean. One man says, "What a prospect for a country when its rural population was changed into a great band of gamblers." Whoa.
yeah, this is the part I was talking about.
Okay, so I'm going forward a few pages. Okay, so on December 17th, 1791, a new issue was ordered, making in all 2,100 millions authorized. Coupled with this was the declaration that the total amount in actual circulation would never reach more than 1,600 millions. What do you think's going to happen? Do you think that declaration's going to last?
Okay, before we move on, I just want to add something because it just occurred to me that I'm reading this and I'm finding it funny, but it just occurred to me that I used to live and work in a very rural area, and I worked construction. And now I have stopped doing that to work in crypto full time. So I can't judge these people too harshly for the rural population turning to gambling itself.
Yeah, but at least Reserve is a little bit more highbrow.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
just
We're doing
a
it
little bit,
right.
yes. So I'm going forward, and this is where it gets into a little bit of numbers, so that you can understand how depreciated things are getting. Despite these encouragements, the Essaynots, nominally worth 100 livres, had fallen, and at the beginning of February 1792 to about 60 livres, and during that month fell to 53 livres. February is also a short month. In March, Claviere became Minister of Finance. He was especially proud of his share in the invention and advocacy of the Essaynots and now pressed their creation more vigorously than ever. And on April 30th of the same year came the fifth great issue of paper money, amounting to 300 millions. At about the same time, Cambon sneered ominously at the public creditors as rich people, old financiers, and bankers. Soon payment was suspended on dues to public creditors for all amounts exceeding 10,000 francs. Whoa, that probably just benefited very certain people. This was hailed by many as a measure in the interest of the poorer classes of the people. Oh gosh. But the result was that it injured them most of all. Henceforward, until the end of this history, capital was quietly taken from labor and locked up in all the ways that financial ingenuity could devise. All that saved thousands of laborers in France from starvation was that they were drafted off into the army and sent to be killed on foreign battlelands.
Damn.
So a couple pages forward, the washerwomen of Paris, finding soap so dear that they could hardly purchase it, insisted that all the merchants who were endeavoring to save something of their little property by refusing to sell their goods for the wretched currency with which France was flooded should be punished with death. The women of the markets and the hangers-on of the Jacobin Club called loudly for a law to equalize the value of paper money and silver coin. It was also demanded that a tax be laid, especially on the rich, to the amount of 400 million francs to buy bread. Marat declared loudly that the people, by hanging shopkeepers and plundering stores, could easily remove the trouble. The result was that on the 28th of February, 1793, at 8 o'clock in the evening, a mob of men and women in disguise began plundering the stores and shops of Paris. At first, they demanded only bread. Soon, they insisted on coffee and rice and sugar. At last, they seized everything on which they could lay their hands: cloth, clothing, groceries, and luxuries of every kind. 200 such places were plundered. This was endured for about 6 hours, and finally order was restored only by a grant of 700 million francs to buy off the mob. Wow. Okay, all right. Now this is when it gets really interesting. Okay, so now, and at last, there. So this is a couple pages forward. And at last there were adopted the Great Four Rules, which seemed to statesmen of that time a masterly solution of the whole difficulty. First, the price of each article of necessity was to be fixed at 1 1/3 of its price in 1790. That's 33% of its price in 1790. Okay, so it's $3, so now it's $4. That sort of thing. Like it's fixed at $4. Okay. Secondly, all transportation was to be added at a fixed rate per league. Thirdly, 5% was to be added for the profit of the wholesaler. Fourthly, 10% was to be added for the profit of the retailer. Nothing could look more reasonable. Great was the jubilation. The report was presented by Barrera. His nickname was the Tiger Monkey. Then, then in all the glory of his great orations, now best known for his portrait by Macaulay, nothing could withstand Barrera's eloquence. He insisted that France had been suffering from a monarchical commerce which only sought wealth, while she while what she needed and what she was now to receive was a republican commerce, a commerce of moderate profits and virtuous. He exulted in the fact that France alone enjoys such a commerce, that it exists in no other nation. Dot dot dot. The first result of the maximum was that every means was taken to evade the fixed price imposed, and the farmers brought in as little produce as they possibly could. This increased the scarcity, and the people of the large cities were put on an allowance. Tickets were issued authorizing the bearer to obtain at the official prices a certain amount of bread or sugar or soap or wood or coal to cover immediate necessities. But it was found that the maximum, with its divinely revealed four rules, could not be made to work well, even by the shrewdest devices. In the greater part of France, it could not be enforced. As to merchandise of foreign origin, or merchandise into which any foreign product entered, the war had raised it far above the price allowed under the first rule, namely the price of 1790, with an addition of one-third. Shopkeepers could therefore could not sell such goods without ruin. The result was that very many went out of business, and the remainder forced buyers to pay enormous charges under the very natural excuse that the seller risked his life in trading at all. That this excuse was valid is easily seen by the daily list of those condemned to the guillotine, in which not infrequently figure the names of men charged with violating the maximum laws. Manufacturers were very generally crippled and frequently destroyed, and agriculture was fearfully depressed. To detect goods concealed by farmers and shopkeepers, a spy system was established with a reward to the informer of one-third of the value of the goods discovered. To spread terror, the criminal tribunal at Strasbourg was ordered to destroy the dwelling of anyone found guilty of selling goods above the price set by law. The farmer often found that he could not raise his products at anything like the price required by the new law, and when he tried to hold back his crops or cattle, alleging that he could not afford to sell them at the prices fixed by law, they were frequently taken from him by force, and he was fortunate, if paid even in the depreciated fiat currency, fortunate indeed if he finally escaped with his life. And this goes on. Involved in all these perplexities, the convention tried to cut the Gordian knot. It decreed that any person selling gold or silver coin or making any differences in transaction between paper and specie should be imprisoned in irons for 6 years, that anyone who refused to accept a payment in assignats or accepted assignats at a discount should pay a fine of 3,000 francs, and that anyone committing this crime a second time should pay a fine of 6,000 francs and suffer imprisonment of 20 years in irons. Later, on the 8th of September 1793, the penalty for such offenses was made death, with confiscation of the criminal's property, and a reward was offered to any person informing the authorities regarding any such criminal transaction. To reach the climax of ferocity, the convention decreed in May 1794 that the death penalty should be inflicted on any person convicted of having asked before a bargain was concluded in what money payment was to be made. Nor was this all. The great finance minister, Cambon, soon saw that the worst enemies of his policy were gold and silver. Therefore, it was that, under his lead, the convention closed the exchange, and finally, on November 13th, 1793, under terrifying penalties, suppressed all commerce in the precious metals. About a year later came the abolition of the maximum itself. So they, in about a year, they abolished all of the maximums that they set forth. Wow. So again, you say, oh, it's 100. What currency? Oh, what currency? It's the S and yachts. You didn't say S and yachts. You're dead. I don't mean to laugh. Like, imagine that.
It's too soon, Braden.
Yeah, it's too. Yeah. What currency is the payment going to be made? And then there's spies everywhere that get rewards for, think about that, man. Whoa.
It is crazy to jump ahead a little bit, and we'll get to it in a bit, but eventually, like, the public does turn against this, but it's remarkable to me that this went on for as long as it did. And I can understand why the government might have kept on doing it, even if the public didn't like it. But it's interesting to me that the public kept on believing that this was a good idea for as long as it did. But then I guess you can look at what's happening today when you're talking about people blaming shopkeepers for selling goods for a profit. And you can compare it to there are recent politicians who are calling for price controls when the real problem is just inflation in general.
Yeah, here's this is one of the last pages of the book. The mercantile classes at first thought themselves exempt from the general misfortune. They were delighted at the apparent advance in the value of the goods upon their shelves, but they soon found out, as they increased prices to cover the inflation of currency and the risk from fluctuation and uncertainty, purchases became less in amount and payments less sure. A feeling of insecurity spread throughout the country. Enterprise was deadened, and stagnation followed. All this vast chapter in financial folly is sometimes referred to as if it resulted from the direct action of men utterly unskilled in finance. This is a grave error. That wild schemers and dreamers took a leading part in setting the fiat money system going is true. That speculation and interested financiers made it worse is also true. But the men who had charge of the French finance during the Reign of Terror, and who made these experiments, which seem to us so monstrous, in order to rescue themselves and their country from the flood which was sweeping everything to financial ruin, were universally recognized as among the most skillful and honest financiers in Europe. Cambon, especially, ranked then and ranks now as among the most expert in any period. The disastrous results of all his courage and ability in the attempt to stand against the deluge of paper money show how powerless are the most skillful masters of finance to stem the tide of fiat money calamity when once it is fairly under headway, and how useless are all enactments which they can devise against the underlying laws of nature. Month after month, year after year, new issues went on. Meanwhile, everything possible was done to keep up the value of paper. The city authorities of Metz took a solemn oath that the assignats should bear the same price whether in paper or specie, and whether in buying or selling, and various other official bodies throughout the nation followed this example. In obedience to those who believed with the market women of Paris, as stated in their famous petition, that laws should be passed making paper money as good as gold, Couthon, in August 1793, had proposed and carried a law punishing any person who should sell assignats at less than their nominal value with imprisonment for 20 years in chains, and later carried a law making investments in foreign countries by Frenchmen punishable with death.
As you were saying that, I was reminded of, I'm not going to say the name of this person, but there's the phrase, human beings make markets the way that bees make hives. And I don't, I'm not someone who believes in like complete deregulation, but it is interesting just to see all acts of trying to control this just making the problem worse over and over and over again. I don't think there's anything in here that says like anything that the government did made anything better.
Yeah. This is imagine if you just tried to, well, I mean using gold obviously, but just yeah. Okay, so the question will naturally be asked, on whom did this vast depreciation mainly fall at last? When this currency had sunk to about 1/300th part of its nominal value, and after that to nothing, in whose hands was the bulk of it? The answer is simple. I shall give it in the exact words of that thoughtful historian from whom I have already quoted. Before the end of the year 1795, the paper money was almost exclusively in the hands of the working classes, employees and men of small means whose property was not large enough to invest in stores of goods or national lands. Financiers and men of large means were shrewd enough to put as much of their property as possible into objects of permanent value. The working classes had no such foresight or skills or means. On them finally came the great crushing weight of the loss. After the first collapse came up the cries of the starving. Roads and bridges were neglected. Many manufactures were given up in utter helplessness. To continue, in the words of the historian already cited, none felt any confidence in the future in any respect. Few dared to make a business investment for any length of time, and it was accounted a folly to curtail the pleasures of the moment, to accumulate or save for so uncertain a future. Well, two things I will point out. And I'm not trying to like shill reserve, but there was a point in which we quoted earlier where it said like if you can't exchange your currency for the underlying, it's kind of useless. The function is like dubious. I think that's a pretty interesting quote. But also this one in this paragraph I just read. The working class had no such foresight or skill or means. On them finally came the great crushing weight of the loss. So, what one of the goals of the reserve protocol is to make the same thing. So in this story, you have the people that could, financiers and men of large means were shrewd enough to put as much of their property as possible into objects of permanent value. That exists today. It's like what Nevin says. these people basically have these like incredibly diverse portfolios, and they've kind of like figured out how to store their wealth. Okay, like really well. They've like got it down. How do we make that as something that the people who have no such foresight or skill or means, how do we make it so that they can do that thing as well? It's very it's a tough nut to crack. But like, do these people deserve to have access to this thing? And yeah, it's pretty much possible by technology. It's a tractable problem. You just have to do it. It's just like Elon trying to land the rocket. That gigantic 300-foot rocket. If that's not possible, you're never going to be able to do it. And it's like, no, you can do it. Like, it's just going to take a lot of work, and it seems impossible, or it seems really far off.
The thing about hard problems is if you do manage to solve one, it will make you very wealthy.
Well, yeah, not only that, but you can once you have it solved, you don't need to like continually resolve it again. Like one of the beauties of I think Urbit has this idea. At the end of the day, you should be able to not manage code forever, and you should just be able to go to the beach, and that thing is done. You don't need to water that plant forever. You just do a small amount of maintenance. The same thing with the reserve protocol. Everybody is spending all of this energy finding similar answers. What if you can just make it so that that work is done and transmitted, like the accessibility to that person's work like exist, and maybe they can even make money from launching an index that they store their value in. Here, I'll take 0.5% of the thing, and you can have access to my index. Yada yada. Oh, somebody else can do it better, and they're going to charge 0.4% instead of 0.5%. It's like competition. So yeah, but it's just trying to get that very that platform ready for people to compete upon is a lot of work. Okay, so here's an interesting bit. Complaints were made that the army of engravers and printers at the Mint could not meet the demand for assignats, that they could produce only from 60 to 70 millions per day, and that the government was spending daily from 80 to 90 millions. They're like literally spending it faster than the people can produce it.
And what was the original amount that they made? 400 million? That was the first one?
I can't even... Well,
yeah, and
this is the weird thing about the book, though. They these are like the units that they use to describe things. Like, he'll say 80 to 90 millions, but I don't know if this is assignats or if it's francs or something else. Like something's off. The amount that they printed, I think, was in francs. Like, it's denoted in something else, but they are printing assignats that are like different amounts. It's weird. But in any case, the in just a little bit, I'll put a table up on the screen. But the units become more clear. So, the purchasing power of this paper having now almost become nothing, it was decreed on the 22nd of December, 1795, that the whole amount issued should be limited to 40,000 millions, including all that had been previously put forth, and that when this had been done, the copper plates would be broken. Even in spite of this, additional issues were made, amounting to about 10,000 millions. But on the 18th of February, 1796, at 9 o'clock in the morning, In the presence of a great crowd, the machinery, plates, and paper for printing assignats were brought to the Place Vendome, and there, on the spot where Napoleon Column now stands, these were solemnly broken and burned. It goes on. We will be readily seen that it was fully time to put an end to the system, for the gold Louis of 25 francs in specie had, in February 1796, as we have seen, become worth 7,200 francs. So that's from 25 to 7,200 francs. And at the latest quotation of all, no less than 15,000 francs in paper money, that is, 1 franc in gold was nominally worth 600 francs in paper. Such were the results of allowing dreamers, schemers, phrasemongers, declaimers, and strong men subservient to these to control a government. Okay, so basically, they're done with paper money, right? They're done. Like it's over. And so now we begin the phase to France healing, or is it? Okay, so here's on the next page here. Pursuant to this decision, it was decreed that a new paper money, fully secured and as good as gold, be issued under the name mandats, and in order that these new notes should be fully secured, choice public real estate was set apart to an amount fully equal to the nominal value of the issue, and anyone offering any amount of the mandats could at once take possession of the government lands, the price of the lands to be determined by 2 experts, one named by the government and one named by the buyer, and without the formalities and delays previously established in regards to the purchase of lands with assignats. And yet, in order to make the mandats as good as gold, it was planned by forced loans and other means to reduce the quantity of assignats in circulation so that the value of each assignat should be raised to 1/30th of the value of gold, and then make mandats legal tender and to substitute them for assignats at the rate of 1 for 30. Never were great expectations more cruelly disappointed. Even before the mandats could be issued from the press, they fell to 35% of their nominal value. From this, they speedily fell to 15%, and soon after to 5%, and finally, in August 1796, 6 months from their first issue, to 3%. This plan failed, just as it failed in New England in 1737, just as it failed under our own confederation in 1781, just as it failed under the Southern Confederacy during our Civil War. And again, this is being read by an American statesman before a meeting of senators and members of the House of Representatives, both political parties, in Washington. So, this was a course at a university, etc. So it goes on, to sustain this new currency, the government resorted to every method that ingenuity could devise. Pamphlets suited to every capacity were published explaining its advantages. Never was there more skillful puffing. A pamphlet signed Marchand and dedicated to the people of good faith was widely circulated, in which Marchand took pains to show the great advantage of the mandats as compared with assignats, how land could be more easily acquired with them, how their security was better than with assignats, how they could not, by any possibility, sink in values as the assignats had done. But even before the pamphlet was dry from the press, the depreciation of the mandats had refuted his entire argument. Yikes. Okay. So basically, they basically say, forget this. So ended the reign of paper money in France. The 2,500 millions of mandats went into the common heap of refuse with the previous 45,000 millions of assignats. The nation in general, rich and poor alike, was plunged into financial ruin from one end to the other. And then what I'm going to put up on the screen right now is a table, how things were valued in 1790 and how they were valued in 1795.
I remember thinking that the way that they described, like, so for a pound of soap, that makes sense. But then it says a pound of candles. And in my head, I'm like, okay, what is a pound of candles? You know,
What do you mean you don't? Well, I mean, it'd be like, what's a gigawatt? What the hell is a gigawatt?
I mean,
That's
yeah,
3 pounds of candles.
oh,
I
okay.
don't. I don't know. It's.
But
I mean, they're measuring electricity or light.
I just find that description to be very funny. Just a pound, but like it doesn't say how large the candles are. Or anyway,
Well,
um,
I think like in our head, candles are like a we burn candles as like a novelty, right?
mm,
And to them, they burn it as a unit of lighting something. So it's like we need pounds of candles. How would like a manufacturing place light everything before electricity by candles, and so how many pounds of candles would you need to light a manufacturing facility per day?
yeah, but how many candles would be in a pound? That's struggling to understand. Anyway, it's not
I'm
important.
Well, it's like how big is 12 inches? How big is a foot? It's like, or how big is a meter?
I guess
You,
you have to be there for it.
yeah, you just had to be there.
So
Um,
the other thing I found interesting about this was it says for a pair of shoes. So this is all converted into American dollars from what the French currency would have been. So in 1790, a pair of shoes would have been $1. For 1795, it would have been $40. Now I wear boots, and my boots are fairly expensive. But how much do shoes cost nowadays?
yeah, I was looking at that too. I was like, this isn't that bad. 25 eggs, $5. I think I pay about that much now.
That we should be very concerned about that, apparently.
Yeah, and I was like, I think, yeah, and it's like the what is it? The Roman centurion is like, if he was paid in gold, how much was the gold worth today? And it's like $40,000, and it's like,
Mm.
wait, what? How much gold was the Roman centurion paid back then? How many ounces of gold? How much ounces would that be worth today? And it's like $40,000 was their yearly salary, and it's like,
Mm.
man, what the? Yeah. So, what's a bushel of oats? Like,
I have no idea. It's a bushel, man. Like
honey,
it's
honey, are you at the store? Can you give me a bushel of oats? Can you? Oh, honey, can you get me a cartload of wood?
give me a bindle of bread, if you would.
A bindle of bread?
You
That
know, a
doesn't.
bindle.
No.
It's like what the hobos have over their shoulder on a stick.
Oh. Oh, here's an interesting one, and I think this hits a little bit too close to home. How about this? It's not for me because I don't do this, but I'm sure there are some people that we know that do this sort of stuff. A few years before this, leading women in the French society showed a nobility of character and a simplicity in redress worthy of Roman matrons. Of those were Madame or no, I'm sorry, Madame Roland and Madame de Moulin. But now all was changed. At the head of society stood Madame Tallien and others like her, wild in extravagance, daily seeking new refinements in luxury and demanding of their husbands and lovers vast sums to array them and to feed their whims. If such sums could not be obtained honestly, they must be had dishonestly. The more closely one examines that period, the more clearly he sees the pictures given by Thibaudot and Chalamel and de Gaucourt are not all exaggerated. Not at all exaggerated.
And then the next line says the contrast between these gay creatures of the Directory period.
This is 1890s gay.
That's funny.
Um, okay. Here's something really interesting. And here it may be worth mentioning that there was another financial trouble especially vexatious, while, as we have seen, such enormous sums, rising from 20 to 40,000 millions of francs in paper, were put in circulation by the successive governments of the Revolution. Enormous sums had been set afloat in the counterfeits by criminals and by the enemies of France. These came not only from various parts of the French Republic, but from nearly all of the surrounding nations. The main source being London. Thence it was that Count Joseph de Puisset sent off cargoes of false paper, excellently engraved and printed, through ports in Brittany and other disaffected parts in France. One seizure by General Hoche was declared by him to exceed in nominal value 10,000 millions in francs. With the exception of a few of these issues, detection was exceedingly difficult, even for experts. For the vast majority of the people, it was impossible. Here's here's the financial agony was prolonged somewhat by attempts to secure funds by another forced loan and other discredited measures, but when all was over with paper money, specie began to reappear, first in sufficient sums to do the small amount of business which remained after the collapse, then as business demand increased, the amount of specie flowed in from the world at large to meet it, and the nation gradually recovered from that long paper money debauch.
Well, the one thing I did want to kind of bring up, because this is mentioned at the very end, and are you still recording?
Yeah.
So the one thing I also wanted to add to this, and this is mentioned at the very end, that that counterfeiting was a massive, massive problem, and that people like Britain, I think, would make these false Asiat. How do you pronounce it? Asiat?
Enseignants.
Enseignats that were basically identical, and it was even difficult for experts to be able to tell what was a fake one and what was a real one, and that they would ship literally just in huge ships stacks of this money, and and that was a huge contributing factor to this, to the inflation, and it's interesting to consider, because like this is something for that blockchain would be able to address, that you wouldn't that that with that technology you would not be able to pull that. You could make conceivably different kinds of money and that they would be worthless, but it wouldn't be able to pass as other kinds of money.
I honestly just have such a hard time like fathoming this, having actually been real. Um, part of the my mind is like, oh, this is obviously just like AI slop. written and then converted to distress text, and somebody uploaded it to a distinguished website to troll everybody into thinking that this happened. You know, the book is out of circulation, so we're printing a digital copy. It looks like it's a scan of an original book, obviously, but yeah, I would 100,000% recommend that everybody read this, because
I
just
have
like
not
start to back.
I have not had this much fun reading old literature, and I define old literature as anything over 100 years. I've not had this much fun reading old literature in quite a while. It was surprisingly entertaining. I'm sure it wasn't entertaining at the time that it was written. It was, but just there are little bits about this that are just very amusing to read today.
So it's only 68 pages, like 3 to 5 hours reading, depending upon how fast you go. Um, and so I'll end on this. There is a lesson in all this which it behooves every thinking man to ponder.